What happens when a CEO grabs a broom and ends up questioning everything he thought he knew about his business? Nathaniel Nate Carter had built his restaurant chain from the ground up after buying it from a retiring owner 12 years ago. From a single store to 14 bustling locations across 3 states, Nate had poured his soul into turning the brand into a place where families could eat well and workers could build careers. But lately, the numbers at the Pinebrook location didn't make sense. Sales were dropping even though the area was growing. Staff turnover was high. Customer reviews were cold and vague, rude service, long waits, dirty floors. Nothing concrete, but something was off. He'd asked his district manager, who claimed it was just young staff not pulling their weight. But Nate knew better than to accept vague answers. He hadn't met most of the hourly workers personally. Each store had its own team. And he wasn't one of those CEOs who plastered his face across company posters. He believed in structure, delegation. But maybe, he thought, maybe he delegated a little too much. So he called in a favor from a friend in casting who owed him from a past investment. A week later, Nate had a realistic salt and pepper wig, some added crow's feet, and a new name, Gary, a middle-aged man supposedly re-entering the workforce after being laid off in shipping. Pinebrook didn't know what was coming. He walked through the doors on a Thursday morning at 8:52 a.m., hoodie zipped up, khakis slightly wrinkled. The place smelled like fryer oil and coffee. A teenage girl behind the counter barely looked up before calling. "Yeah? I'm here for the training shift," Nate said, voice a little gruffer than usual. "Right, you're the new guy." She pointed her thumb toward the swinging doors. "Back there, ask for Lisa." Lisa, the manager, was in her early 40s, tall, wiry, with a sharp voice that cut through the clatter in the kitchen. She didn't smile when she saw him. "You're the temp?" she asked, wiping her hands on a towel. "Yeah, Gary," he said. "Right. You'll be sweeping floors, cleaning trays, and staying out of the way." She turned on her heel. "Follow me." In the back, he met 2 other workers. Willa, a quiet high school senior with big tired eyes, and Omar, a college student who offered a quick handshake and a polite nod. They both looked overworked. Nate noticed the fry station was a mess, the ice machine leaking, and not a single supervisor checking in. His first task was sweeping the dining area. Easy enough. But as he pushed the broom under the booths, he caught bits of conversation coming from behind the counter. "Willa, how many times do I have to tell you?" Lisa barked. "You're useless when it gets busy. You just stand there like a deer in headlights." Nate froze. I'm sorry, I'm trying." Willa's voice cracked. "Trying doesn't cut it. You either keep up or you get out of the way." Customers were within earshot. A couple looked up from their meals. Lisa didn't care. Nate gripped the broom handle tighter. He looked at Willa's face reddened. Her jaw clenched as she picked up trays with shaking hands. She didn't talk back. Omar gave her a quiet nod as she passed, whispering something that made her nod back. Support, maybe. But no one stood up to Lisa. He finished his sweeping and went to the back. Lisa was on her phone. She didn't acknowledge him. Willa was refilling sauces with trembling hands. "You okay?" Nate asked quietly. She gave a small shrug. "Just trying not to get fired." He didn't say anything, not yet, but the air in his chest felt tight. The rest of the shift was chaos. The lunch rush slammed them. Lisa barked orders without lifting a finger, while Omar handled the grill and drive-through at the same time. Willa ran food and cleaned tables, while Lisa stood near the register, doing little more than scolding. Twice, Nate caught customers walking out after waiting too long. One man shook his head and muttered, "Place used to be good." By the end of the day, Willa looked completely drained. Omar checked on her in the break room. "You should take your break," he said. "I can't. Lisa said I had to cover bathrooms." "I'll do it," Nate said, stepping forward before thinking. They both turned to him. "You don't have to," Willa started. "I want to," he said. She hesitated, then gave him a small, grateful smile. That night, Nate sat in his car in the lot long after close. His disguise itched, his back ached, but none of that bothered him as much as what he'd seen. He'd built a company to be better than this. And if this was happening in one store, what about the others? He stared at the darkened windows of the restaurant. Tomorrow, he was coming back. and Lisa wouldn't see him coming. Nate arrived just before opening. The sky was still gray. The streetlights hadn't shut off yet. He parked a few storefronts down this time, not wanting to risk anyone spotting the same car twice. His back still felt stiff from the day before, and his legs ached in a way they hadn't in years. But it wasn't the physical part that bothered him. It was the silence in Willa's eyes, the way Omar had stepped in so naturally, like it was just part of surviving the day, and the way Lisa stood still while others drowned. This time, he brought a small notebook tucked into his jacket pocket. If he was going to fix what he saw, he needed to remember every detail. He stepped through the front door at 6:58. Lisa was already behind the counter, sipping a coffee from a personal thermos. She didn't look up. "You're early," she said flatly. "Figured I'd get a head start on the prep," Nate replied, pulling the mop bucket from the corner. "Floor's still sticky from last night." "Not your job, but fine," she said, already scrolling through her phone. "Don't touch the registers." He filled the bucket with hot water and degreaser, then got to work. As he mopped, he glanced up toward the front windows. The drive-through lights buzzed on. Omar walked in 10 minutes later, nodding toward Nate with a quiet, "Morning." His eyes looked heavier than yesterday. Willa arrived just before 7:30. She wore the same shoes and an oversized sweater that hung past her apron. Her hair was still damp, pulled back loosely. She walked with a steady pace, but her expression was blank. Nate noticed the faint red mark on her forearm, just above her wrist. Burn. Recent. He stepped into the back to grab gloves and spotted a small whiteboard propped above the prep sink. "Do not touch unless you're a trained lead," it read in the thick black marker. Below it were prep instructions for the day. Lisa's name was written in all caps at the top, but no one else's. Nate glanced toward the fridge. It hummed unevenly, and condensation dripped from the seal. He opened it. Boxes of produce sat haphazardly on the second shelf. The lettuce bin had a tear at the bottom, soaking the cardboard beneath it. He shut it and returned to the front. Lisa was inspecting her nails, one foot propped against the counter. "Lisa, the fridge is leaking," Nate said. "Maintenance knows. They'll get to it when they get to it," she answered. "It's dripping onto the produce. Then move it. Use your head." He nodded and stepped away. The morning rush started slow. A few contractors came in for breakfast sandwiches and coffee. Nate handled the trays, Omar prepped orders. Willa refilled the drink station and wiped down booths without being told. She moved automatically, like someone who didn't expect thanks. At 8:45, a middle-aged woman and her teenage son came in. The boy wore a hoodie and kept his hands in his pockets. They ordered at the kiosk. Lisa stepped up to the counter, glanced at the screen, then turned to Willa. "Order 38. Make it fast." Willa washed her hands and began assembling the tray. The boy walked up to the counter a moment later. He was nervous, rocking on his heels. Nate watched from the side as he leaned forward to ask something. "Excuse me," the boy said softly. "Can I get it without eggs?" "I forgot to click it?" Lisa didn't look at him. "Too late. It's already being made. But it just went in." "Then next time, pay attention," Lisa said. The boy blinked, startled. His mother stepped up beside him. "Ma'am, he just made a mistake. If it's not yet cooked." Lisa held up a hand. "We're not remaking custom orders because someone can't use a touchscreen." The boy's eyes dropped. His mother's jaw tightened. "Cancel it," she said. "We're leaving." "Fine," Lisa said, tapping the screen. "Don't expect a refund for a mistake you made." Nate stepped forward. "They didn't even get their food yet," he said. Lisa turned. "Gary, no one asked you. Handle the trays." Nate looked to Omar, who met his eyes briefly, then went back to the grill. The woman and her son left without another word. Nate took a breath, forcing his hands to stay calm. By 11, the line stretched past the door. Omar was flipping patties and boxing orders while also taking drive-through calls. Willa ran trays, took out trash, and restocked cups. Lisa stood at the register, rarely moving from her spot. A young woman with braids and a lanyard badge approached the counter. She looked frustrated. "I've been waiting 20 minutes. My food's not even started." Lisa didn't blink. "It's a busy morning. You'll get it when it's ready." "I saw people who ordered after me already eating." "Then maybe they ordered something smarter." The woman stared at her. Lisa didn't flinch. You know what? Never mind. I'll call corporate, she said, stepping back. Go ahead, Lisa muttered. You think they'll care? Nate stepped back into the kitchen, heart pounding. He found Omar scrubbing the flat top during a lull. The kid had a quiet focus in everything he did. You good? Nate asked. Getting there, Omar replied. Not my first rodeo. Is it always like this? Omar hesitated. If Lisa's here, yeah. Why don't you say something? Omar looked toward the hallway, lowered his voice. Last guy who did got cut from the schedule said he wasn't team-oriented. Nate nodded slowly. And Willa? She just wants to graduate, one more semester. She's got younger siblings, helps pay for groceries. Nate didn't reply. He walked to the storage room, closed the door quietly, and pulled out his notebook. Lisa's behavior was no longer bad leadership. It was damage. Deliberate, sustained damage. He wrote down the names of the employees working that day. He circled Willa's. Then underlined Omar's twice. At 2:40, Lisa called for breaks. Gary, you get 15. Eat fast. Willa, you're next. Omar, stay on the line. Nate sat on a milk crate near the back door, unwrapping a sandwich he didn't really want. He stared at the alley. Garbage overflowed from the bins. A raccoon darted behind the dumpster. The back lot hadn't been swept in weeks. Willa stepped out 10 minutes later. She sat down on an overturned bucket and took small sips from a bottle of water. Do you like working here? Nate asked. She looked over slowly. Does it matter? I'm just wondering. Willa shrugged. It's a job. Pays enough to keep the lights on, most days. He waited before speaking again. Lisa doesn't seem supportive. She's not, but she's the manager, so it doesn't matter, right? It should, Nate said. Willa gave him a sideways glance. You're new. You'll learn. She stood up before her time was up and went back inside. Nate stayed behind for a moment. He stared at the cracked concrete, the rusted door hinge, the broken lock on the storage cage. He looked up at the sky. It had finally cleared. Sunlight bounced off the windows above. He stood. Time was up. The next day, Nate arrived an hour before opening. The streets were quiet, but his thoughts weren't. He sat in his car watching the restaurant lights flicker on one by one. There was no longer any doubt Lisa had to go. Not just because she was rude or ineffective, but because she was actively harming the people he had once promised to protect. He had seen enough, but this wasn't something to be handled from a distance. Not anymore. He texted his assistant to assemble the district leadership at headquarters the next morning. Then he walked across the lot, pushed open the back door, and clocked in under the name Gary one last time. Inside, the kitchen lights were on, but the dining room was still dark. Omar was at the prep station, cutting sandwich rolls with surgical precision. His earbuds were in, volume low enough that he could still hear the fryer beep. The kid always worked ahead of the curve. Nate nodded to him and got a quick nod back, no words, just quiet rhythm. Lisa hadn't arrived yet. Nate moved to the sink and started washing pans from the night before. The residue from the fryer oil clung to the steel like glue. He worked in silence, the sounds of Omar's blade tapping the cutting board steady behind him. At 7:20, the front door opened hard enough to rattle one of the ceiling tiles. Lisa walked in, keys jangling, drink in hand, already speaking. Who left the supply door open? Neither of them answered. She didn't wait for one. Gary, you're on lobby again, and someone better have stocked the sauces, because I'm not doing it today. Nate rinsed his hands and grabbed a rag. He didn't respond. He didn't need to anymore. By 8:15, Willa was there, hair pulled into a tight braid this time. She was quieter than usual, which didn't seem possible. She moved with mechanical precision, boxing pastries and refilling napkin dispensers without needing to be asked. The morning rush built slowly. Nate handled trays and wiped tables, occasionally stepping in to refill napkins near the drink station. Lisa stayed planted near the register, occasionally barking half instructions that nobody really followed because they didn't clarify anything. At 9:30, the tension snapped. A woman in her 50s approached the counter wearing a blue apron and a name badge from the pharmacy next door. She looked exhausted, probably on break between shifts. She ordered a breakfast wrap and a coffee. When the wrap came out, she opened it at the counter and shook her head. "This isn't mine," she said. I asked for no cheese. I can't eat dairy. Lisa didn't move from the register. It's already made. I understand, but I can't eat it. Could you just make another one? Lisa leaned on the counter. You people always have to make it complicated. The room went still. What did you just say? The woman asked. Nate turned from the tray station. Omar stopped mid-step. Lisa didn't blink. You heard me. You people always want special treatment. The woman stared at her, stunned. Nate stepped forward. Lisa, he said, his voice sharp now. That's enough. Lisa looked at him like he'd grown a second head. You don't talk to me like that. You're a temp. No, Nate said, pulling the wig from his head and tossing it on the prep counter. I'm the owner. Lisa's mouth fell open. She looked from Nate to Omar to Willa, who had frozen at the drink station, wide-eyed. You're joking, Lisa said. This is some kind of stunt. Nate stepped forward. My name is Nathaniel Carter. I built this company, and I've been here for 3 days watching you insult customers, ignore employees, and stand around while 2 people do the work of 6. Lisa's face turned red. You don't understand what it's like. No one wants to work. These kids don't listen. I have to keep this place running. You're not keeping it running. They are. He pointed to Omar, who stood motionless, still holding a spatula. To Willa, who's been covering for your laziness all week, and to the customers you've driven away with your mouth. Lisa opened her mouth again, but Nate cut her off. I'm not going to argue with you. You're done here. Go clean out your things. You're firing me, she said, like she couldn't believe it. Immediately. Lisa stood frozen for a moment before turning on her heel and storming out through the back. The screen door banged shut behind her. Silence stretched for several seconds. The pharmacy worker at the counter looked at Nate. I'm sorry you had to deal with that, Nate said, stepping behind the register. Let me remake your order. She gave a small nod and stepped back, still shaken. Nate turned to Omar. Can you cover register for a few minutes? Omar nodded once. Nate walked into the middle of the kitchen and looked at Willa. She was staring at him, still holding a stack of drink lids. You okay? He asked. She nodded slowly, then lowered her eyes to the floor. Let's take 10, he said. Both of you, I'll cover everything. Just sit down. They didn't argue. Nate remade the customer's food himself, made sure she got it for free, and offered her a drink coupon for the future. She took it with a quiet thank you and left without another word. He spent the next half hour on the line, cooking, boxing orders, and talking to customers. He told every one of them that the restaurant was under new on-site leadership and that things were changing immediately. Most gave polite nods. A few smiled. One even said, about time. When Omar and Willa returned from their break, Nate pulled them aside near the dish sink. I owe you both an apology, he said. This place should have never gotten to this point. Neither said anything at first. Then Willa finally spoke. Are you really the owner? I am, Nate said. She looked down at her shoes. Why were you here like that? Because people stopped telling me the truth, he said, and I needed to see it for myself. Omar folded his arms. What happens now? Now, Nate said, now we rebuild this store properly. He pulled a small notebook from his back pocket and flipped it open. We're hiring 2 more line cooks and at least 1 more shift lead. I'll be bringing in a temporary manager by tomorrow, someone from headquarters who knows what leadership looks like. And after that, we're reviewing pay scales, scheduling flexibility, and benefits eligibility. Willa blinked. Why would you do all that? Because you earned it, Nate said. Both of you. Omar looked away, jaw tight. The emotion was subtle but real. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. They returned to work without fanfare. By the time the afternoon rush began, things were already smoother. Nate stayed to help through dinner, this time as himself. Word spread quickly through the staff that the man who'd been sweeping floors was actually the owner. The mood shifted. A few of the younger workers from the evening shift whispered when he walked past, unsure what to say. He just smiled and kept working. That night, after close, he gathered the remaining crew near the front counter. Tomorrow, everything starts fresh, he said. If you're willing to stay, I promise we'll make this a place worth working again. No one left. As the last lights dimmed and the crew filtered out, Nate locked the door and stood alone in the lobby. He didn't feel proud. He felt responsible. And that was exactly what he needed to feel. The next morning, Nate stood outside the Pinebrook location at 6:45, this time without the wig, the fake name, or the need to pretend. The air was brisk, the kind that hinted spring was still weeks away. He waited as the first crew members arrived, unlocking the door himself and holding it open. Omar gave him a short nod as he stepped inside. Willa followed, carrying a folded apron under one arm. Neither said much, but their posture had shifted more alert, more grounded. They weren't relaxed yet, but they were watching, waiting to see if his promises held weight. Inside, the lights buzzed on. The kitchen still smelled faintly of yesterday's oil, but it was quiet. No orders being barked, no tension in the air. Just the hum of refrigerators, the clink of trays being stacked, and the low shuffle of sneakers on tile. Nate moved to the front register and turned the monitor toward him. He hadn't touched one of these since the third location opened. He hesitated for half a second, then tapped the screen and pulled up the crew schedule, still skeleton thin. No reinforcements had arrived yet. That would take days, not hours. He turned as a woman stepped in through the back door, adjusting a clipboard under her arm. Her name was Joy. She'd been with the company for 7 years and had helped launch 5 stores. Level-headed, unflappable. She was here, at Nate's request, to serve as interim manager while he stabilized the location. She offered a firm handshake and got to work without needing direction. By the time the pre-shift meeting started at 7:15, she already had inventory notes in one hand and a list of equipment issues in the other. Nate stood near the prep counter as the crew gathered. A few new faces had shown up, 2 part-time hires from nearby stores, loaned out until the Pinebrook team was fully staffed. No one asked where Lisa was. No one needed to. "We're not going to fix everything this week," Nate said, as eyes turned toward him. "But we're going to start with what we can control. Today, no one works a minute past their shift. Breaks will be enforced. If something goes wrong, we deal with it directly. No more blaming down the ladder." Willa's arms were folded. Omar leaned against the cooler door. Neither spoke, but neither looked away. Joy took over, assigning stations and checking for allergies or availability gaps. She moved with quiet authority, asking questions in a low voice, always listening fully before she responded. When she asked Omar to train one of the floaters on grill, he didn't hesitate. Willa was placed at drinks and expediter, a faster-paced role, but one that gave her more control. She accepted the change with a single nod. By opening, the line was already forming. Orders came fast, but the difference was immediate. Joy moved between stations, filling gaps where needed. She didn't hover, didn't micromanage, but she noticed. When the soda machine sputtered, she called in the service ticket herself, then helped Willa reroute drink orders to the backup station. When a regular customer asked for a modification, Omar handled it without needing approval, and Joy backed him up on the floor. For the first time all week, no one raised their voice. No trays were thrown together. No one was called out in front of customers. At 10:40, a man in a black polo walked in holding a clipboard. He wore a name tag from the regional facilities team. Nate met him at the door and walked him through the back hallway, pointing out the leaky fridge, the uneven freezer seal, and a growing patch of water damage near the storage sink. The man nodded, took photos, and promised to follow up within 48 hours. Back on the floor, Willa was moving with purpose. She still didn't talk much, but she wasn't shrinking. A customer asked her where the napkins were, and she walked them over without hesitation. When a child dropped a juice box near the trash bins, she grabbed a towel without being asked. She didn't flinch when the lunch bell rang. Nate watched her from the side for a moment, then walked to the back and called Omar over. "You've been holding this place together longer than I realized," Nate said, folding his arms. "I just didn't want to lose the job," Omar replied. "You didn't. In fact, if you're interested, I'd like to offer you a paid mentorship. You'll shadow district training staff for 2 weeks. If it works out, we'll fast-track you for assistant manager placement." Omar's eyes flicked up. "You serious?" "I wouldn't say it if I wasn't." Omar took a breath, then nodded once. "Yeah, I'm interested." "Good. We'll start next Monday." They didn't shake hands. They didn't need to. Around noon, Nate stepped outside to take a call from corporate. The regional HR lead confirmed that Lisa's termination paperwork had been processed. There would be no reinstatement, no appeals, Her behavior had been documented thoroughly enough that there was no question. By the time he stepped back inside, the lunch rush was in full swing. Orders moved quickly. Customers left with thank yous. The air felt busier, but not strained. Nate took a moment to lean against the wall near the service counter. He watched as Joy rerouted a line cook to help Willa with bagging. Watched as Omar corrected a misplaced order without fanfare. Watched as Willa handed a tray to a customer, made eye contact, and gave a quiet but unmistakable, "Have a good day." The customer smiled back. By late afternoon, the store was still running tight, but not frantic. The new hires had found a rhythm. Joy had already handwritten a list of candidates from nearby stores who might transfer in. Nate reviewed it with her in the office, then signed off on accelerated onboarding for 2 of them. At 5:15, he called a break meeting in the back room. The team sat around a prep table, sipping water and peeling off gloves. "There's going to be more changes," Nate said, setting a folder on the table. "We're revising the performance review structure. From now on, anonymous feedback from hourly staff will factor into every manager's evaluation. Nobody gets a free pass just because they've been here the longest." A few heads nodded. Willa kept her gaze fixed on the table, but her foot tapped quietly in place. "We're also adjusting the base pay at this location. Starting rate is increasing by 15%. Back pay will be calculated from the start of this month and added to your next checks." Now, heads lifted. "Long term, we're rolling out mental health support stipends, but that'll take a few weeks to finalize. In the meantime, any shift issues, schedule conflicts, or equipment concerns come straight to Joy. And if she doesn't have an answer, she'll get one from me." He paused. "Questions?" No one spoke at first. Then Willa raised her hand halfway. He nodded toward her. "Can we—" She glanced at Omar, then continued. "Can we keep the current crew together? Like, the ones who came from other stores? They actually work." Joy stepped in. "If they're willing to stay, we'll make spots for them. That's a promise." Willa nodded and looked back down, but her shoulders had lifted slightly. After the meeting, Nate walked through the dining room one last time. The floor was clean. The trash bins were emptied before they overflowed. The soda machine still sputtered, but a technician had already been scheduled. As he reached the front door, a customer who'd been eating alone near the window stood up and approached him. "You the guy in charge?" Nate nodded. "Place feels different, better. Staff seems sharper." "Appreciate you noticing," Nate said. The man offered a small nod and left. Outside, the sky was turning orange. The parking lot was half full, but no longer scattered with trash or oil streaks. There was a rhythm to the place now, not perfect, but steady. Nate leaned against the brick wall and exhaled slowly. He hadn't saved the store in 3 days. He wasn't naive enough to think that. But he had stopped the bleeding, rebuilt the foundation, and reminded himself of one truth he'd forgotten along the way. No spreadsheet tells you who's holding your company together. Only your presence does. And from now on, he'd be more present than ever.